Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I am excited to have the opportunity to lead you through this. Pardon me, little
Bottom
tech.
right corner.
I shared the wrong thing. Okay. Here's what that's not what I wanted to share either. But we can do it this way. So good afternoon, Ann Cummins Bogan, and I am really excited to have the opportunity to lead a conversation around school level collaboration. And joining me is Sarah Bogan, who will also assist in our discussion today. We are excited to talk a little bit about our organization and then also provide some tools and resources for you today that you'll have access to very quickly. We do want to let you know we have a website, acbconsulting.org, where we welcome you to visit and register to connect with us, as we'll have some emerging resources coming available almost in a consistent flow. I want to maybe just share a little bit about my background as a prelude to our conversation today. I'm a former elementary school teacher. I taught in the Minneapolis Public Schools and then in a district here in Illinois, Northbrook Glenview School District 30. And in about my 18th year of teaching, I had the opportunity to collaborate with administrators in my district on the revision of our teacher evaluation process. And through that collaborative experience, I always knew that my voice as an educator was powerful, but I really had a new opportunity to not only just have my voice heard, but also step into spaces where I was able to have some shared accountability for the decisions we were making collaboratively. And so that launched my desire to go out into other systems and really work to lift the voices of educators in the same manner. And so I started some consulting work around 13 years ago. And the primary focus of my work currently is around systems work, which is why we're having this webinar today. Our organization focuses on 4 core beliefs that drive our work. The first is around equity. We know that this is a key pillar in public education, and our approach and our experiences is that if it's not foundational to everything that we're doing, if we treat it as a separate initiative, it often can get lost and not necessarily owned in the way that it needs to be to fundamentally change experiences for students and educators. We believe that continuous improvement is a journey. It's not a deficit approach to our work. It's just that the work we do is complex and imperfect. And so we always need to be thinking about where we are and where we want to go. In that same vein, we believe all systems can improve. And when people are focused on continuous improvement, it doesn't mean that they're moving from something that's broken to fixed. We often talk about it as moving from good to great. And finally, kind of highlighted from my own personal experience, if we're going to really engage the voices of everyone in the system and have shared ownership for the outcomes of our work, then we need to have authentic and consistent systems and structures for collaboration, which is what we're working on today. I'm going to kick this over to Sarah, who's going to give you a little assignment.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Bogan, and I work with ACB Consulting, and my role is primarily focused around equity and inclusion, as well as developing our resources and content. And it would be great if we could get to know who all is joining us and just a little bit about you. But to do this, it would be fun if everyone could type your name, your role, your job title, and as specific as you want to get about where you're from, whether that's your district, your city, or state, but not hit send in the chat until I say 2, like ready, set, go. And then it will just be kind of a everyone at once. So I'm going to give everybody maybe 30 to 45 seconds to do that, to type it. And then when I say now, you can hit send, and then we'll kind of have a fun all at once moment of where everyone is from. Okay. And now everybody can share where they're from. Okay, awesome. We've got some principals, um, educational coach and consultant as well. Welcome. Some directors, actually from school in Italy. Wow, welcome joining in to Illinois. Director of curriculum, Williamsville, Springfield, Evanston, Arizona, Chicago, Troy, Newport Beach. So this is a really fun, diverse group of people that we've got joining. And I think it's going to be exciting for everyone to engage with each other and ask questions as we go. And we'll have some polls throughout where you can give us some feedback on your experiences with collaboration. And I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, I see, and I see some. I have some shout outs in here of some folks that I've had the opportunity to partner with too. So I might have to pick on you to give some testimony today. Um, yeah, and then Sarah, if you wouldn't mind also just highlighting some of the roles and responsibilities of the folks that are joining us.
Yeah, we've got Director of Professional Learning at West 40 Intermediate Service Center. We have school improvement specialists, middle school math teachers, assistant superintendent of teaching and learning. We've got a lot. Yeah,
Right.
it's great.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you. And for friends that I know and friends I've yet to meet, thanks for joining us today. So Sarah is going to put a resource in the chat, and we will also, again, this is something that you can download at our website, acbconsulting.org. But the design of our webinar today is that I'm going to use this as a guide for our conversation so that as I introduce an idea, you'll also have something in front of you. We recognize that some of you may not be in a position to actually look at the resources. And so it's great that Aaron is going to share this webinar, our slides, and then access to our website. The other thing is that we will pause from time to time just to check the chat to see if there are questions or reflections that you're willing to share. And then we do have a couple of polls that will engage you in throughout the session. So Sarah, just let me know if there's anything in the chat as we're moving. But the first thing would be just to make sure everybody has access to this resource that would like to look at it. And just let us know if you're having any problems. So Sarah, did you drop that in the chat?
Yep, and yeah, let us know if there's any issues accessing it, but I think it should be good.
So this resource will, again, I'll make reference to the page numbers and you can kind of follow along or certainly just listen in and think about, think about what we're talking about and then you can reference it later. So we designed 3 essential questions for today's session. And being a former teacher, I like to start with outcomes and then try to make sure we hit these in our conversation. So the first was just to think about how does collaboration at the school level contribute to a student-centered approach to teaching and learning? What does it actually look like? What are some actual strategies that you can integrate into your practice? So we'll come back to these essential questions. We also, we met Arlen and the Ed Leaders Network. I think it was all the way back in October that we had our first conversation. And one of the tools that the Ed Leaders Network and the Illinois Principals Association is focused on is the school leader paradigm. One of the school districts that I'm partnering with currently, Oswego School District 308, is a pilot district using the school leader paradigm. And I just shared with Arlen, I was there this morning and they were having some reflective conversations about that. So, but one of the domains in that leader paradigm is around systems. And so we pulled this information or this idea from the domain to link to our learning today. So, the idea that a school leader is constantly assessing systems, thinking about cycles of inquiry to make sure that there's intentional effort to dismantle historically inequitable systems and make sure that stakeholders are engaged in student-centered systems. So when you sort of think about the domain and this systems domain and the core values that I shared, you see the nice integration between our work and also the work of the Ed Leaders Network. This framework, which if you're locked into the toolkit, is a framework I developed after about 10 years being out in the system as a systems consultant. And this came out of a time in my work that I was able to kind of step back. I had the privilege of working closely with Charlotte Danielson for a number of years. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Charlotte's work, she has an instructional framework for teaching that's been adopted nationally that really lays out the key standards and practices of effective teaching. I also had the opportunity to be mentored and collaborate with researchers and consultants from around the country that really helped me to grow in my own understanding of systems. And so what emerged from that is my understanding that an effective system really requires there to be some essential components. And so I've laid them out in this framework. The first is that we have to start with a shared vision of where we're trying to go. We have to have a common vision of excellence that we hope to achieve. And then if you drop to the bottom of my framework, the accountability through shared commitments is really another essential piece. And sometimes we just focus on those two building blocks, the common vision and the accountability through shared commitments. And the truth of it is you can't get to shared accountability if you don't have a common vision. And sometimes when I go into systems, they're constantly struggling with this notion of trust and effective communication. And what I often find is they haven't taken the time to define why they're doing what they're doing. So if you then drop into the two building blocks below the common vision, we have our data-driven decision-making and innovative and responsive strategies. And what I often say is that the first year of a system really refining its work, you're spending a lot of time in these top three building blocks, and you're using that data to make sure that the vision that you've established is the right one. You're constantly listening, learning, just like the leader paradigm, systems domain paradigm content talked about, is that you're constantly listening and learning to the system, and we have to have data to inform that. And then I kind of think as the strategies as sort of the mortar between the bricks of the strategies are what close our gap between what the data say and what we want to accomplish. And so we constantly work that. Then when you drop down, we think about impact monitoring. And so when we talk about cycles of inquiry, we have to take time to say, is what we're doing having the intended impact we had hoped for? And if not, then we've got to go back up, look at that data, reshape our vision, adjust our strategies. The robust information systems is what I call the lifeline of the system, and it has to be constant. It's the thing that tells us that everyone knows where we're going, they know what their role is in that process, and they know how they contribute to success. This work, I know Dave Heinzel's on the call. Dave and I worked closely together for a long time in national networks of collaboration between union and management. And this graphic is an adaptation from a graphic by one of my mentors, Dr. Patrick Dolan. And what we try to illustrate in this graphic is that my framework is kind of always living and breathing within the system, but that we have to, when we go in and we start to think about collaborative structures, we have to understand the context of the system within which they sit. And in schools, we often find that power and shared decision-making occurs at the top of the system. And if we're not intentional about collaborative structures and building them throughout the system that really have students at the center, then we find that we're in that space of lack of trust and frustration because we're not sharing the vision. So what we're going to do today is really focus in on the school leadership team that you see kind of dropped in the middle of this image. And we highlight the role of the union in our work. Sometimes I work in places that don't have organized unions, but in any case, having an intentional system or structure for engaging educator voice. So what I've laid out for you in this first chunk of information, I want to pause and just see if folks have questions or thoughts or ideas. But what essentially we're saying to you is that in order for us to have successful collaboration, we have to have a particular roadmap. We have to have some intentionality of structures, and we have to be sure that we're constantly listening and learning to the system. So I'll just pause for a moment and see if there's, just an aha, something I said that was affirming, or just an opportunity to take it in. Also, feel free to, look at the if you have the toolkit in front of you, take a moment to check out this graphic, which is laid out for you on page 7.
Working with cycles for the last 2 years. Great.
All right, I'm going to pivot into some research, and then I'm going to ask you a question. So one of the things that we said in the description of this session that we would share theory. So I gave you a little bit of my theory. And then we also wanted to share with you some research. And so I don't know about all of you, but what I often find in education is that our best ideas are often grounded or connected to research that we may or may not even be aware of. And what the best thing that happens for us when we see something in print that is proven to be a best practice, and it's part of what we do innately, we feel very affirmed. And so the other thing I would say is that research-based practices oftentimes are common sense. And so they can feel intimidating, but in most cases, they're affirming. So I'm highlighting the work of Saul Rubenstein from Rutgers University, as well as John McCarthy from Cornell University. And they actually just published a book on all of their research not too long ago. And when I reached out to Saul to congratulate him on his book, he said, check out page, I can't remember what page it is, but he gave me a shout out, which was kind of fun. So the study and the research that John and Saul did, which is really affirming for our work, showed that when we have school level collaboration, there's an increase in student performance, the school climate is more positive, and there's increased innovation across schools. And primarily in their research, they found that to be done through the union. So if we think of engaging educators into collaborative work, and we go a step further to make sure that those educators are connected to their unions, then that whole professional organization that exists within a district is a place for networking and sharing among educators. So they talked about that when they were studying the systems and looking at schools that had high levels of collaboration, they actually went in and talked with educators about what it was they collaborated around. And so educators reported that the things that they focused on in their collaborative work were student performance data, curriculum development, cross subject integration, doing vertical alignment of standards or instruction, doing that informal mentoring, and then sharing instructional practices. When you dive deeper into the research, and you can Google this, and again, it's resources that we're happy to share with you. You also find that a high partnership school was a school where at least 35% of the staff was collaborating on a weekly basis. So we're not talking about schools that had 100% of their staff that had bought into the whole PLC or collaborative time. It was at least a third of their staff that was consistently coming together to be focused on these types of conversations. Again, this just breaks down the data a little bit more specifically. So on there, this was the CASP. So this was the California, actually it was not the CASP, but it was at that time the California state test. And in the collaborative schools versus the highly collaborative schools versus the lower collaborative schools, ELA and math performance were increased. Teacher turnover was reduced, and teachers reported a greater sense of efficacy and connection to their buildings. Principals were seen as a greater resource by the staff, as was the union reps. People didn't go to their union just when they had a problem, and their principal was not somebody that they talked to whenever there was a problem, but it was more focused on students and on teaching. And so those were all positive outcomes. The attributes that they highlighted in these schools were collaborative structures, like we're talking about today, goal alignment, similar to the common vision of excellence, the discretion, so that the space that folks had to make decisions about their own work, psychological safety to be able to come and say what they tried and what worked and what didn't, and then shared decision making. So we do want to launch a poll to get a sense of how things happen in your world. And so the first would be, is collaboration a focus in your school? And when I say a focus, is it something you're actively working toward? Or might it be not really a focus, but it's something we aspire to? And then the second is kind of connected to the first, where you do have collaboration, do you see an increase in that shared accountability among staff when they have a chance to be part of a collaborative process? So we'll just get a sense of what your experiences are that help us think about our next part of the conversation. I'd also invite you to, use the chat if there's if you're having an idea that you want to share, or if you want to, if the poll questions are too narrowly asked in a way that you're not able to answer easily. Okay. So it looks like out of the 25 of you that answered the poll, 92% have collaboration as a particular focus, and then 72% of that would say that you do see an increase in accountability. There's another 28% that are not seeing the increase in accountability. And so I'm not surprised to see that collaboration is a focus. I'm also not surprised. It's exciting to see that reaping the benefits of buy-in, but I also know that there can be challenges. So just going to check the chat here. Yeah, so Jill, thanks for your comment. That's sort of that inconsistency of who's kind of buying in. One of the things I would say is that it takes time. First and foremost, when we invite educators in as authentic partners to decision making and opportunities to collaborate when they traditionally have not been asked, they oftentimes don't trust it at first, and they see it as a fleeting sort of romance. But I think that when you can stick with it and almost, intentionally in your brain say, all right, how much of our staff is really bought into this? And where are we falling down? Sometimes what can happen on our leadership teams or in our leadership opportunities, we grab the folks that are the most willing. And sometimes the naysayers, we sort of keep them at arm's length so that they don't come in and interfere with what we're trying to accomplish. But what I found sometimes is that when you actually open up those opportunities to folks, and even those that may not jump in and be as positive, but you bring them and give them a space, you start to break down that wall of deflection and sometimes even negativity by inviting their voices in. We'll talk more about that right now as we move into some practical strategies. So you're focused on collaboration, and you recognize the importance of it, and some of you are even seeing the impact. So what we're going to do is just highlight a few pieces of the school leadership team toolkit that might be useful to you. So the first is that We have to make sure, again, my common vision of excellence, that we know the purpose of a school leadership team. And so in the model that I support, we really make sure that the school leadership team is the team that is focused on setting direction for the school. So if there's a school improvement planning process that you're part of in your district or you're in your organization, we make sure that those school improvement plans really are the focus of the work of the school leadership teams. What that means sometimes is that other things that school leadership teams might focus on, we have to find a place for those. So I'm referencing information right now on page 17 of the toolkit. The next thing is that the school leadership team supports the collaboration. We make intentional connections between the members on the school leadership team and the educators that help to support collaborative work in PLCs or teacher collaboration time. The school leadership teams take time to reflect on their work. So we don't come to a meeting and run through the agenda and adjourn and walk out, but we from time to time say, how are we doing as a team? Are we engaging in shared decision making? Do we have shared expectations for collaboration? The team looks at data. And one of the things I talk about in my framework is that data is often a word that can create an emotional response for educators, and they're not comfortable with that word. So I really make sure that I underscore the fact that data is simply information that's needed to address gaps toward goals. And so that data might be, NWA map data or IAR data or state tests or, much more statistical. The data could also be samples of student work. It could be qualitative perceptions of classroom walkthroughs. So data is simply the information. Again, the school-wide collaboration is important, and then utilizing a two-way information system so that the team is listening and learning. So we have a visual that just to underscore our process here, that it's really around establishing vision, supporting collaboration, analyzing data, and refining progress. So back to those cycles that one of you named that you've been kind of focused on, that's the image. One of the things I highlight in the work is that school leadership teams are not new. I started my teaching career in 1992. In every school that I've worked in, there's been a leadership team. The difference between the work that I go in and help to support and what might be a traditional leadership team is that school leadership teams can be a place that's focused on logistics. So we talk about moving through an approach of continuous improvement. We talk about moving from logistics to learning. And so one of the things that you might reflect on, and I'm actually going to ask you this question, is if you have leadership teams, would you define them as more learning focused or logistics focused? So when we think about the traditional leadership team, it's about information sharing, sometimes dissemination. The principal goes to a principal meeting or gets information from the district in another way, and then they pull the leadership team together to let them know what they need to be aware of, and then the people on the leadership team meet in their departments or grade levels and share that same information. But it's not focused on goals, it's not focused on students, it's not focused on teaching and learning. So what we try to help you think about is how can you, if that's the structure, how can you start to think about moving to a state of listening and learning? And so we're moving to a second poll, which I'm not sure. Yep, we have that up here. Is first, do you have established and defined practices for school leadership teams in your school or in your district? And then the second, are these leadership teams currently focused more on the logistics side of things or teaching and learning? So I don't know if we have a second poll we can launch.
We do.
Again, I invite you to add some anecdotes to the chat if you have a thought or a question. All right. So everyone can see the results, right? So I guess what I would ask you all to think about is what's your reaction to what you're seeing? Any thoughts? Go ahead and type something in the chat. Yeah. I'm not going to lie, this is one of those where I can hook everybody, and this sounds like such a brilliant idea, but the reality of it is there is a lot of logistics that have to get done in a building. And so that balancing act is really a tough one. Um, and I've even found that if you make a move to a more listening and learning system, people get frustrated with what's happening with the logistics. You know, we've talked about the carpool line 4 times and nothing's changed, or you know, our classrooms, our conversations with our custodians have not been fruitful, and we're frustrated with X, Y, or Z. Or we said we were going to do a custodial appreciation thing, and we haven't gotten to it because we're spending, you know, all this time on student data. So when are we going to get to that? So I'm looking at your responses, and I think that there's some good practices there, and then some ideas. So what we're going to spend our next little bit of time on is that what are some practical strategies of balancing both? And I do want to underscore that logistics are important in a school. Um, things come up every day that were not expected. They don't go as planned. And so it's not a bad thing to have a focus on good communication and logistics. The question is, how can we balance, like some of you just spoke about, and not get lost in logistics alone? And that's where the first piece I would say is making sure that school goals, whether through your school improvement plan or through you know, just talking with the staff about a priority, is important. So if you take a look again, I'm going to reference the toolkit. Is that the first thing we invite you to do is conduct a theory of action, or assess your current state. And so what we have in this toolkit is, for each of the 6 building blocks, there's a self-assessment tool. And so you can kind of take a look and see kind of how the team is functioning. The other thing that you might take a look at is the makeup of the team. Sometimes if you want to be in a collaborative space, you've got to make sure that the composition of the team is right. And so on page 30, pardon me, on page, yes, 30, we talk about what representation might look like. We also encourage you to think about the roles and responsibilities of the team. Does everybody understand that if you are going to serve on the school leadership team in the way that we're envisioning it, you're also going to have some ownership and responsibility of being a vehicle for clear communication between your colleagues and the team. And we need to hear the good stuff and the bad stuff. So then I go through on page 31 some ideas for selection. Some other things that we think about is the intentional connection. I just alluded to it a little bit, between what the school is focused on and then what teachers are doing during their collaboration time. I work in a number of systems, some that have explicit time set aside for collaboration, even like an early release day once a week, all the way up to sites that, you know, teachers might have a 40-minute planning period the entire day. One of those is designated for collaboration time, and just knowing the reality of teaching. If I have a 40-minute planning period and I'm expected to collaborate with colleagues during that time, and that's our only time for collaboration, probably not going to be super impactful. But taking inventory of when you have time for collaboration, and then helping to structure some intentional connections between what the school is focused on and what the PLCs are focused on. So again, a couple of examples. We might be doing benchmark assessments, and so we get our winter data. And so at the SLT, the school leadership team meeting, we take a look at that data. We look at where we're seeing strengths, where we're seeing opportunities for growth. And then members of the SLT, we talk about a protocol for that, and they take it back to their PLC, and we have them reflect on their practices and the data in that level. And then it comes back up to say, okay, this is what we talked about. Taking it a step further, I'm going to see, nope, I don't have a slide for it. So whoops, now I really screwed this up. So I'm calm and cool though. I got it. I'm going to find the right slide. The other piece, and actually I'm going to go to the toolkit itself, because I want to show you what I'm referencing. In addition to the connection to the PLCs, the other thing that we found is, hopefully no one's getting seasick, is the idea of connecting your meeting structures. And so sometimes we have our SLT and we have our PLC, but we also have our faculty meetings. We might have committee meetings. And so one of the things that we found to be successful is that the SLT might think about, okay, here's what we're focused on. And so this is on page, Sarah, feel free to help me out. No, I got it. Page 38. The SLT comes together and meets monthly. And they look at the goals, they look at their data, they look at what's happening in the PLCs. Then at the staff meeting, which might fall on an alternate week, something is shared with the staff, even if it's just 20 minutes of a staff meeting. So we looked at our fall data, we looked at it in PLCs. Second grade has decided that we need to really spend more time differentiating our lesson plans. The English department really wants to have some time to collaborate with the science department, so that they can look at that that informational text and look at some of those standards that need to be more intentionally lifted in instruction. And then if there's early release school PD days or other opportunities for school-wide PD, again, you keep the theme of your school goals focused. And so you're just constantly going deeper and deeper into sort of those problems or priorities of practice that you have highlighted. And again, if you're grounding this in a school improvement plan and you're using data as reflected in our 6 building blocks, then you're kind of keeping the system moving. If we go back to the research around goal alignment and discretion, the other thing is that we're not scripting necessarily a PLC conversation, but we are setting a topic with some deliverables that the person who represents the PLC on the school leadership team can bring back. The other thing that we have in the document is, some ideas for how to help structure that weekly grade level or department meeting, and if you call them PLCs, just some suggested structures. I know that their PLC training is something that a lot of districts are seeking, and I am finding that people are struggling between over-managing that and making it too tightly controlled, and allowing the discretion of the educators. So let me just do a little synthesis on this last chunk that I kind of threw at you, which is, if we want to have a school leadership team that is truly focused on teaching and learning, how do we also navigate the need for ongoing review of logistics and information sharing that has to occur? And so one of the theories that I'm putting, and action research that I've seen out in the field, is that when we can get really clear on the priorities that we're focusing on, we keep that priority as a focus of our school leadership team, our faculty meetings, our PLCs, and our building PD, then we're more likely to go deeper and broader with that. And then we have a way of casting that net far and wide to bring more people from the building into the conversation. Let me pause again. And I would love I want to check out the chat, and then I would love to know if there are any specific questions or thoughts, just around this last piece that I just named, or anything else. And the other thing is, if there's anyone who is interested in unmuting, we can also take a question directly.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've got a question you'd like to shout on the mic, just simply raise your hand with the tools in the Zoom toolbar, and I can allow you to unmute yourself. Otherwise, the chat is there for you to respond as well.
I do see we have some classroom teachers in the session as well. And so I've been speaking about this in some ways as to how administrators might organize school leadership teams. Certainly, if there's a teacher perspective that I haven't quite, lifted, feel free to share some thoughts from a teacher perspective. Thank you, Lucy. I think there is a lot, and we always learn from each other. Alyssa, one of my friends from Evanston. Yeah. So one of the things Alyssa Holfeld is raising from Evanston is, and I am glad you raised it, because the other thing that another resource in this toolkit is the idea of like joint committee. So you're talking about like the Culture Climate Committee. Depending on the size of your building, the school leadership team can end up with a whole heap of work that they can't navigate. So sometimes, like oftentimes when I coach a system on school improvement plans, I encourage a goal around academics, a goal around culture and climate, and then maybe a goal around parent engagement. And so if the school leadership team is going to take the lead on student data, student learning data, and the PLCs, you might decide that a culture and climate committee that sort of looks at behavioral data, looks at the SEL strategies that are being implemented, that could be almost like a parallel structure that runs adjacent to the SLT. Again, I see Mary Perola, my colleague from the Archdiocese of Louisville. Some of the schools are so small that, and this is true in any system, if you only have, a dozen or 18 staff members in the whole school and you start building 3 committees, then everybody's on a committee and then they just meet in their classrooms and tell each other what happened in every committee. So we do have to really make sure it's fine-tuned to your system. But I think, and Alyssa, I'm kind of on a bird walk, but I think the idea of like, here's our school leadership team, here's our central focus, but we do need some sister committees to help us tackle some of the specific issues or priorities in our building. One of the things we encourage you to do is to take inventory of all the different committees or meetings or things that you have. I remember a while back, I was in a school, I was part of a staff meeting, and the principal was reviewing the committees for the coming school year. And the staff, I think there were about 18 to 20 teachers on the staff, and they had 22 committees. So that was a really interesting process to watch. And then what was also interesting is that some of the committees only met once or twice a year, like the talent show. And there were a lot of teachers that like to volunteer for that committee, right? So we also have to balance, if I'm on the school leadership team, for example, or I'm on the culture climate, and that committee is meeting every month. And then we say, oh, and then there's other people that are on the talent show committee that meets once or twice a year. Is that really a committee? Do you really want to classify it in the same way, or do you want to just say that's a project, that's a team that helps us? And not diminishing, we need good talent shows, but we also don't want to kind of create any extra support for the building as one standard responsibility. All right. Okay, so then I'm kind of wanting to make sure that there's some time for questions and maybe we don't have any. But a couple of things that I would just say, again, as some synthesis work. And so Sarah, thanks for sharing your slides. If you want to go kind of towards some potential next steps. One of the things that you might consider is just reading through the building blocks and looking at each of them and the elements that are connected there, and then the rubrics that accompany those building blocks have been really helpful in helping teams think about where their strengths and opportunities lie. One thing, I was actually working with a team yesterday, and we really just honed in on the common vision for excellence. Do we have shared goal? Do we have a common vision? Do we have specific goals, tools, and strategies that are, aligned to that vision? Do we have a shared understanding of collaboration and shared decision-making? And have we established trust and mutual accountability within our team? So just that one vision, that one common vision might be a place to start, and to think about what are our goals and who knows about them and who owns them. So that would be a potential next step. Another potential next step is to just think about the current purpose of your school leadership team and what it sets out to accomplish, and start to ask some questions about what might it look like if we shifted this. I do think it's an interesting time of the year. I know that we start to feel like we're moving downhill on the timeline, but the reality of it is there's some good time for robust work to really reflect on your current practices in the months of February and March. And then start to think about what are some small tweaks we could make for this school year, but then really set us up for success next school year. So I really encourage you not to, first of all, let me say, I know it's a busy time, but I really do think the timing of this webinar is really nice, because you're not going to just reinvent the wheel and create whiplash on your system by changing everything overnight, but there is a nice potential amount of time to do some reflective work. One other thought is that sometimes I suggest, if you're a building principal and you have an assistant principal, or you have a school counselor, social worker, an interventionist, or an instructional coach, any of those folks that sort of see your system from the 50,000 foot, bring that crew together first, just to kind of say, okay, if you think about us shifting to a space where we're collaborating and staying focused on what we're trying to do to improve our school, how can we come together and make sure everyone is supported? Yeah, so that's our thoughts for today. As you might be able to tell, I have a lot to say about this work, and I love doing this work. We hope that today was helpful. We do have one final poll that I'll ask Sarah to launch, and it's just kind of a little assessment of our work today. And then again, we'll leave the chat open. I'll kind of kick it back to Arlen to see, Arlen, how you like to wrap these sessions. But I just really, truly appreciate people taking the time. It's really cool to see people from Italy and Egypt, and then friends, Sonia Spalding, shout out. I mentioned Mary and Alyssa. It's just fun to see people that I've had the opportunity to work with closely. Because the best part about this work and about collaboration is that you learn in every single conversation you engage in. So I actually think my mom might be on. So shout out to my mom. Thanks for tuning in. And my sister Molly, who's a retired principal, who is a thought partner to us at ACB Consulting as well. So go ahead and take our last poll, which is checking some accountability for us.
All right, as we're wrapping up that last poll, and Sarah, I want to thank you both for spending some time with us this afternoon, sharing some wonderful strategies and resources for creating a collaborative school culture. This has been an excellent webinar, and thanks to all of our participants for logging in, staying with us the whole time, and responding to the polls and chats. If you do have any questions, you are free to post them in the chat right now. We can hang out here for a couple more minutes to answer any final questions and wrap things up. I'm going to keep the recording going. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results with everyone. Looks like good outcomes here, Ann, for your session today.
All right, good. Thank you.
And I'll be following up tomorrow with a link to the recording, and the PowerPoint is a PDF and an evaluation link that will give us some more in-depth feedback on what you thought about today's webinar. And for our Illinois participants, it will get them the ISB evidence of completion form for entering 1 PD clock hour for your attendance today. And lots of thank yous coming into the chat for both you, Ann and Sarah, for your presentation today.
All right, and thanks to everybody for taking the time.
Thank you.
If you don't have any questions, you can hover down at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar and you'll find the big red leave button in the lower right. Click that leave button, that'll log you out of the session for today and let us know you're all set. We'll send you on your way and be following up with you tomorrow via email.
If you're still with us, just a reminder, I was just going to say our website, acbconsulting.org as well. Oh.
I'll put it in the chat.
And Sarah, nice job. That was a great presentation. Very
Great.
well thought out, well organized. The slides looked great too. Good design work on the slides. Do you do your own slides?
Sarah and Ann.
I do
It's
that.
it's a culture of collaboration, right?
It is a culture of collaboration for sure.
Are in the midst of we just did a little bit of a redesign, branding and building our website, and that's been super helpful. So yeah.
Yeah, it's nice when you've got like a template to kind of work from, you know, what fonts you use, what colors you use. Yeah, that's always really nice.
Great.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.